Suddenly, I was in this tunnel. I looked up and I saw this light.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Raymond Moody. I can't believe it. Is it you?
As far as I know.
I'm A.J. Parr. Yeah, I've been researching and I've been reading several of your books. I know that you are the father or the grandfather of a near-death experience research. And I also know that you had a near-death experience that you haven't, mentioned that much.
I did not have the kind of classic thing out of my body and so on. I did come very close to death, but I didn't get into the typical thing. Mine was more kind of being there on the edge, and I became aware of it, kind of the separation of this realm we're in now from another beyond work.
When you wrote your first book, your first famous book, Life After Life, the prologue was written by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she also was a pioneer. She was also a pioneer, a researcher, and I think she actually started before you did studying this, but she had not put a name to it, right?
Well, I think that we just came to it by different routes. I learned about it in 1962 by reading Plato's Republic, in which has such a story, and I was very impressed, and I asked my professor what this was all about.
Okay, so this is the story of the soldier who died and came back.
See, I was a philosophy major in college, so that's how I came across it. Reading Plato's Republic in September of 1862. And I asked my professor Hammond, and he said, yeah, that the early Greek philosophers studied cases of people who had apparently died and been revived and had experiences. And he said that around the same time, Democritus also commented on these experiences. And he said that it was just the residual biological activity the bodies even has to apparently kill them. And so then, and 3 years later, in 1965, when I was a third-year student, is when I met the first living person who had such an experience. And his name was Dr. George Ritchie.
Yeah, he was a soldier when he had his experience, and then he turned into a psychiatrist. Can you tell me, how did you learn his story?
I was a student at University of Virginia, where he was a psychiatry professor. And everybody in the philosophy department knew about Dr. Ritchie's experience. And the reason was that, they knew that the early philosophers were interested in it. So that was it was general knowledge in the philosophy department. So I listened to Dr. Ritchie's experience. Then I heard a couple of more and then just throughout graduate school. Then when I started being a philosophy professor, I heard them from my students and then from my colleagues. Started talking about this. My professor colleagues at the university would tell me about their own experiences. It just spread kind of like that.
Okay, so when you published your first book, Life After Life, did you meet a lot of resistance from the other members of the medical society or the medical world?
Absolutely not.
No?
And AJ, it's a really interesting thing. Sometimes I'll hear the story, oh, poor Dr. Moody was persecuted by the medical community. And I don't, it makes me sound like a hero, but it's not the truth. When I entered medical school in 1972, in September of 72, and I had already known about these experiences at that point for 10 years. And I had been lecturing about them when I was a philosophy professor, all before I went to medical school. And since I had gone to PhD in philosophy and the philosophy professor route, the people I grew up with in Georgia who were ahead of me in medical school, right? In other words, that I had been a philosophy graduate student and a philosophy professor. Then I went to medical school.
Okay.
So people of my age that I grew up with in Georgia they had already gone to medical school and were ahead of me, but they knew about my research. So they spread the word among the faculty of the medical school that this medical student, Raymond Moody, had been studying cases of people, were resuscitated and almost dying. And within 2 weeks of arriving at the Medical College of Georgia, 8 of my professors had called me and invited me to lunch or to come to my house, and they would say, Dr. Moody, thank you so much for studying the subject. Because about half of them will say that I've heard it from my patients, and so I'm glad somebody gets studying it. Or the rest of them had it themselves, that they themselves had empty experiences, so they would.
Wow.
I did not get the resistance I got was from the fundamentalists religion.
So do you think that most scientists accept near-death experiences as a fact, or do they still say that it is an illusion or a hallucination?
I just think, most scientists, there's a very broad expression. Number one, the people who would be most, who would come into this contact most likely would not be a chemist or a physicist, right? It would be a medical doctor. And so in medical world, this is a clinical phenomenon, right? It's something, happens in different, and just like in the general public, some doctors think, that, this must be the afterlife. Other people say it's just got to be the oxygen deprivation of the furnace. So, there's no unanimity of opinion that causes it. It took time for people to sink in with, but it's now been in the medical journals all like years.
The first feature you mentioned in your near-death experience commonalities, you mentioned ineffability, the ineffability, and that is something I also found when I researched mystical experiences and also religious experiences. There is that characteristic of ineffability. It's also mentioned by the varieties of spiritual experiences.
William James.
William James, yes.
Right, and it's is talking about the 4 characteristics of mystical experience.
Yes.
Ability being the first stuff.
Why do you think people who have near-death experiences have a very different experiences, although they do have common traits?
There are 15 common traits, and that one person may have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of them, or 10 or 12 or all of them. And one thing that depends on very much, I think, is how close they got to death. The very more extreme thing that people saying, becoming aware of other dimensions of the existence, for example. And these things don't make sense in a way in the way we are given talk to about them, but that when they do occur, that those are the very ones that are the most involved and most detailed, and that get into these otherworldly things, like seeing a dimension of knowledge, for example, I've heard, or lower down, people say that they see people who don't seem to quite get it, but they're dead. And the idea is that they're fixated on something that is of this world. And people would tell me this, it's not in me saying that, you mean it's just, but they say even with that, you see people in and out, like enlightened people, whatever that means, in and out among them trying to wake them up. It's just a glitch. And then another realm where the occupants seem to be entirely devoted to knowledge. People describe this like that. If you think of all the best earthly universities and squeeze them into one, you couldn't even begin to imagine this, like a universal institute of knowledge or something. And then beyond that, like the realm which seems to be constructed in sheer light, people say. Theories of light is something for. But those are the ones that are in, that invariably in light, the ones I've talked. Those are the ones with the cardiac arrest go on so long that it needs to just define, and how did that happen? And then there's these things like getting out of her body and during the body from the pierced commitment. Going through a passageway of some sort, coming out into a realm of light, being met by relatives and friends who passed away. Panoramic review of your life, where you see everything that's done in a reviewing sort of way. And these are things that, it's very rare for any single person to have all of it. But that, people get some number on one. Has that been more or less, what you find in your studies?
Yes, I did find one of the basic commonalities is the white light. This white light that seems to be also the source of love, the source of wisdom, the source of peace. Yeah. A lot of people describe it as pure light. Others say it's God. But I don't know. Have you noticed it? People with different religious backgrounds, they define it differently, right?
Yes, they do. They do. However, they also said that it's like I've said. I heard a lot of people over the years who told me that I have to use some words, and the only words or ideas I have are from my religion, but nonetheless, they say that the words are, it's beyond words. The best they can do is to, draw in some concept or idea from what the religion they do know on.
So apparently our cultural background, our religious background, somehow has to do with the way we perceive near-death experiences, right?
Well, I would think it does. I think it gives you the lingo to talk about it.
There are studies like the ones by Dr. Melvin Morse and by Dr. PMH Atwater that prove that kids who are only 3 or 4 years old, they also have similar experiences despite the fact that they are still young, so young that they probably don't have a cultural background,
Well, how early do you pick up a cultural background? I mean, that's hard to say, but what I would say is that the kids that I've heard, which is very few, I'm not a pediatrician, but I've studied pediatrics, of course, in medical school. You have to have some time in that, but even in that brief time, I did happen to be a patient had a near-death experience. He was 11 years old, and I was just examining him for his checkup. He suddenly just started. He said, and he had what you call congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is an endocrine disorder, and these kids have episodic crises where they get real sick. And this was before there was any publicity or, I was not known as a person studying near-death experiences. I was studying them, but I was a medical student. And I was just there in the clinic interviewing this kid. And all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, he just said, and doctor, he said, and about a year ago, I had a crisis, and he started talking to me about it, and I had the medical record right there with me, so I looked back at the medical records. Sure enough, a year before, he had been hospitalized with a crisis, and he had told the nurses exactly what he was telling me. I don't know what to say about pediatric near-death experiences, because I'm so aware of the astonishing things kids say. And I talk to them, man apparently died at birth, but was resuscitated. And he told his parents at an early age about the event, like, although he was being born. And I think at very early age, he started talking about it. He was talking about the walls being pink. And, so the parents took that to be, it's just some fantasy book. But they called, they were puzzled about this, so they called he was born in the Philippines. His parents were in the Air Force, whatever it was, his father was. And he was born on military base. So his father called the guy at the, and was able to get in touch with him. And he told the doctor about his son's experience. And the doctor said, well, the fact was that they needed to paint the walls of the obstetrician room. But they had to paint one, but the only thing they had was pink.
Wow.
So, these things occur. And I can't deny that it occurred, but it's foolish in a way to try to think of the explanation of them. I think it's just like people with the ineffability claims and crime fallacies.
So you have been writing books practically all your professional life, and you have touched a lot of subjects regarding death. What are the apart from Life After Life, which are the books that that were most important for you?
Well, AJ, in the very beginning of Life After Life, a book I wrote in 1974, I talk about the background that I brought to this. And that I said that specifically that the areas of philosophy that I was interested in was logic and philosophy of language. In that sense, like we've been talking about the ineffability, I think that is the crucial point for research, that we've got to crack this ineffability problem. And for that reason, my favorite of my book is called Making Sense of Nonsense.
Okay.
That's right, is the name of the book. And the subtitle is A Logical Bridge Between Spirituality and Science. And that is because I think the real problem here, Western thought, in terms of why we find it difficult to talk about these things, has to do with the fact that a very bad mistake was made in going from Plato. Plato was the first person to distinguish clearly between the literal and figurative domain. He was also interested, as he shows in his dialogues and commentaries, he was very interested in what you and I would call nonsense, right? But not in any bad sense of the term. I'm talking more in terms of Lewis Carroll.
Yes.
So you don't have in Columbia doctors.
I'm familiar with Dr. Seuss because I grew up in the United States. But now that you mention it, and that you mentioned that it is one of your favorite books, I must read it.
Yeah, and so I think that once we can think logically about things that don't make sense, which we can do, it's just a matter of really simple principles. It's just a psychological thing that keeps us from thinking logically about this. But the reality is, nonsense it's not something sublinguist, right? If you think of a horizontal line out in front of you, most people think that nonsense is something down below the line. Actually, it's the other way around. That nonsense is something supralinguistic. It's a structure that occurs over the top of language. It's a more complicated structure than ordinary language in that regard. And so what I did in that book was I worked out principles whereby you think about how you think about that logically. And one of the effects that it has, Jenny, is that if somebody knows this, if they just learn it, at some place in their life and they know how to think like this, then when subsequently they have a near-death experience, it will modulate the way they express their experience. If somebody knows in advance when they have a near-death experience, they can think in terms of the unintelligible, then they are going to change the way they express it. And let me explain why. When Abraham Lincoln was president, there was a very formal state ceremony. I forgot what it was, but all the people were gathered around. And Lincoln's part in the ceremony called for him to mount a horse and to lead a procession away from the thing.
Okay.
Right there in the middle of all the people, when Lincoln got up on the horse put its own back hoof up and got it caught in the stirrup. So the horse was bouncing around. Everybody was shocked into silence and embarrassed. How embarrassing for the president. So Lincoln looked down at the horse and he said, well, if you're getting on, I'm getting on. And everybody just burst that away there. So I said, that's nonsense. It's nonsense to say that the horse. When people say that there are no words to this, and that it was not in time, and it was not in space, there was no space of it. At times, there was no time. But what happened to me was I got out of my body, I went through a tunnel into the light, I met my deceased relatives, I saw my life pass in with you, I returned to my body and came back to life. That's a travel miracle. You were asking me about my favorite book. Well, my favorite one is my book on nonsense, but my second favorite one that I've done is a book that I've self-published this. It's through Amazon, and it's called God is Bigger Than the Bible. What I talk about in that book is that what I've learned through people's near-death experiences is that, God doesn't seem to be interested in people's religion. I mean, I like to say, I talk to God all the time. I pray all the time. I mean, I think if God wanted me to be religious, he would have given me some inkling toward that by now. But he hasn't. We talk about, important things in my life.
You are a spiritual person, right?
I don't know exactly what that word spiritual means.
Oh,
What I would say is I have a relationship with God.
Were you an atheist when you started out?
No, I've never been atheist because that's too much like commitment. It was more like, in the sense that I guess when I was a kid, I guess you could call me an agnostic, but I never thought about God. I was interested in astronomy. And it wasn't that I was an atheist denying that there was a God. It was just that I didn't think about God. I was interested in astronomy. Well, my dad was kind of sarcastic about religion.
So you consider that you suffered somehow a transformation due to your NDE research or due to other reasons?
It was through hearing people, the divine came through these stories. And then I had a personal experience of, being in the presence of God. And
how was that experience? Can you talk about that experience briefly?
Well, again, we get into the thing about the ineffability. It was in 1991. I was going through a sort of crisis, and the presence of God came to me. And I mean, there are no words. It's beyond words. I just kind of melted to the floor.
Do you feel that by doing what you have been doing, you are serving God and you are taking part of a spiritual mission or something?
I hope so, but it's kind of vain and pretentious and egomaniacal.
I think you have done a great job for mankind.
That's up to people other than me.
Okay.
I just try to turn everything over to God. That's the best way to be. Surrender is the most powerful prayer.
Well, thanks a lot for this opportunity, Dr. Raymond Moody. I am really honored.
I am just delighted to be with you. This is just so fascinating, Adrian. I just wish you and all your listeners the best.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm gonna check out your nonsense book. I will read it with a magnifying glass to get another interview.
That would be wonderful because, as a lot of people do, you know that what you want is people to reach you, right? I mean, I give my book to people and say, try to find the hole in this, right? Because if you can't, then I'm benefited because I feel like it gives me more thought that I'm on the right track. But if you find a flaw in it and bring it to my attention, see, then I'm closer to the truth. I see my mistake.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm honored. I am. You don't imagine what an honor this is for me.
Oh, no, please don't say that, AJ. Listen, my life strategy, I try to keep my self-esteem as low as possible.
Oh, wow. You're very humble.
Well, I'm just, my life is centered on these 2 kids we built out at home and my wife.
Okay, so we'll continue talking. I'll read your book and I will contact you for another interview in 1 or 2 months if you don't mind, okay?
Great, I would love to. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
You have a great day, and I'm just so delighted to talk with you.
Take care and God bless you.